Mirco Modolo est archiviste aux Archives centrales d'État, ministère des Biens et Activités culturelles, alors l'Archivio Central dello Stato, Ministère des Beni et delle Attività Culturali. Il s'intéresse à l'histoire du goût pour les antiquités, à l'archéologie au XVIIe, XVIIIe siècle et particulièrement au dessin d'après l'antique. Il s'intéresse aux archives électroniques, à l'open access et aux politiques du patrimoine culturel. Dans ce cadre, il est coordinateur du mouvement en faveur de la reproduction libre et gratuite des documents en archives et bibliothèques afin de soutenir la recherche, qui a obtenu récemment un aménagement des dispositions pour la prise de photographies dans les bibliothèques et les archives. Et il parlera cet après-midi sur photographie numérique dans les archives et les bibliothèques publiques, nouvelles d'Italie, conférences. Alors, pardon, il parlera en anglais. Merci. Per favore.
First of all, I would like to thank you and thank Martin Deloyel for this invitation. I will focus in the speech, but in particular, to the concept of democracy of knowledge, with particular. I refer in particular to the public domain images of cultural heritage. The relationship between digital photography and cultural heritage has become a crucial topic in this century, and it is going to become increasingly important due to the growing cultural, social, and economic impact of digital technology in the contemporary society. The issue is more political than technical, because it raises general questions about both the opportunities and limits of the use of cultural heritage, and about the nature of the institutional mission carried out by museums, archives, and libraries in favor of citizens. For this reason, it is important to initiate an international debate among technicians, humanists, and jurists, and it comes natural to wonder if Europe can or should establish common guidelines to regulate the use of the image of the cultural heritage in relation to the needs of contemporary democracies. Today, I am glad to illustrate you a series of reforms that were introduced by the Italian Ministry of Cultural Heritage and Activities during the last 4 years, to modify the Code of Cultural Heritage and Landscape according to the new demands of the so-called democracy of knowledge. This path was oriented towards 2 directions, basically. 1, allowing specific users and common citizens by law to take photographs by themselves in museums, archives, and libraries. Second point, expanding the possibilities of using freely public domain images portraying part of cultural heritage belonging to the public administration. Let's start from the first point, from point number 1. In the summer of 2014, Law number 106 inaugurated the first phase of the photo liberalization process. It modified the Article 108 of the above-mentioned Code of Cultural Heritage to allow the free reproduction of cultural heritage, with the sole exception of public archival documents and books belonging to the public libraries. In other words, since 2014, visitors to museums, art galleries, archaeological areas or historic buildings of public ownership have been legally authorized to shoot photos, provided that this happened with no flash and that the images were used for cultural purposes only. However, at this stage, as before mentioned, archives and libraries were excluded from the reform, as it seemed difficult to harmonize this new system of free photography both with copyright law and with the right to privacy. Issues concerning, respectively, printed books and archival records. Above all, the major obstacles were the economical ones. Since the reproductions made from personal cameras or smartphones turned into a real source of stable income for the state archives for years, for a long time. In many archives, smartphone or camera photos taken by scholars required a written prior authorization and the payment of a fee, normally €3 per archival binder. In other archives or libraries, users were forbidden to take photos at all, mostly to ensure an economic return to the private companies which obtained the right to manage the reproduction service under a public concession. In 2014, some scholars constituted a cultural movement which launched a vast campaign to collect signatures asking to complete the process of liberalization in order to promote the historical research as much as possible. Indeed, the key question was the following one. Is it fair to charge fees for the use of a personal tool that, just like a pencil or a laptop on the desk, does not require any additional expense for the administration? 3 years later, in 2017, the Italian Parliament answered to that call by adopting the law number 124, which modified the Article 108 of the Code for a second time. This happened shortly after the decision by the British Library and the Bibliothèque Nationale de France to open their doors to users' cameras and digital devices. The new law entered in force on 29 August 2017 with a remarkable achievement. Since then, users of all Italian public libraries and archives are basically free to reproduce with their digital devices printed books and archival records which are not subject by law to particular access restrictions for privacy issues. Indeed, the law set a number of conditions. For conservation reasons, photos are free only if they are taken without flash or tripod. In any case, through devices able to avoid any physical contact between the device and the original item. In other terms, no scanners and no photocopies. Moreover, the reproduction must always be in compliance with the current legislation on copyright, and it is allowed only for non-profit purposes. Soon after its entry in force, the Ministry decided to implement the law with circulars number 33 and number 39 of the Directorate of the Archives, and with the circular number 14 of the Directorate of Libraries. These acts clarified the application of the law in detail. The circular 33 of the Directorate of the Archives allow individual state archives to justify the exclusion from the liberalization of certain documents for conservation reasons, while the circular regarding the libraries only establishes some basic rules for the correct reproduction of volumes or manuscripts. However, all the circulars, both of them, replace any previous authorization formalities with a simple self-declaration. In other terms, after taking photographs, users therefore are required just to fill up and sign a form in order to guarantee they are acting in compliance with privacy and copyright rules, and at the same time to declare that they will use the photographs only for cultural purposes. At this point, it is important to clarify the meaning of the term cultural purposes, which is quite different from the term studying purposes or personal use purposes. This is at the core of the second innovation introduced by the two laws before mentioned. It is allowed not only the shot of the picture, but also the distribution and the dissemination of images for activities involving free expression of thought, creative expressions, and promotion of knowledge of cultural heritage. On the other hand, whoever intends to use the images for lucrative or commercial purposes must, exactly as before, obtain a written authorization from the competent institution and may have to pay use fees. The circulars have also tried to solve the problem of scientific publication through commercial channels, actually representing a gray area. Why a gray area? The image of a manuscript published in a monograph that is for sale on Amazon or sold in a bookstore offers without any doubt a source of income for the publisher. Nevertheless, that image can be seen as a part of a cultural content and may be essential to understand and follow the sequence of the historical argumentation. A compromise has therefore been reached. The conventional limit for establishing the prevalence of the cultural purpose on profit has been set at €17.7 per cover price and at 2,000 copies of circulation. Below this threshold, this limit, the publication is free for the user, who is now required to send a simple electronic communication of his intention to publish to the institute owning the original copy. Above this threshold, it is still necessary to request a formal authorization, and usually a fee is due. In any case, users are asked to correctly quote the source of their image and send a copy of the publication to the institute. It is important also to underline that this simplification is limited to the sources conserved and kept in archives and libraries. It would certainly be appropriate to extend this simplification in the future also to the rest of the cultural heritage to facilitate the work of researchers in archaeology, history of art, and history of architecture. What is the actual contribution of these reforms to the democracy of knowledge? While the digitalization of manuscript and historical volumes initiated by Conservation Institute has become increasingly important, individual scholars experience a growing need to use personal cameras and smartphones to facilitate their transcription of text and the study of the material. In this view, encouraging the digital photography means to widen the horizons of fruition, as it offers greater opportunities to carry out historical research for those who have little time to study in archives and libraries, or who are forced to reach institutes that are very far from their city residence. Digital photography also helps conservation because it avoids direct contact with copy machine, and at the same time it reduces the risk of damage to the original document during frequent consultations. The liberalization also reminds us that the patrimony of archives and libraries belong to everybody, even more than to single institutes. Museums, libraries, and archives represent not only authorities meant to conserve, but above all, centers for spreading knowledge. It is worth remembering that while the reform process was underway in Italy, researchers from Spain collected a large number of signatures through the website change.org to request free reproduction in all Spanish archives, in analogy to what happened in my country in 2014. In the major European countries, free reproduction is an increasingly widespread practice, even if it depends on the discretion of individual institutions. In Italy, it has instead become a principle of law for all the public archives and all the public libraries. This should push us to try to envision, to conceive common rules in Europe and liberalize the use of personal devices and the publication of images, at least for research purposes. In the meantime, even more innovative prospects are emerging in Europe and elsewhere in the world. Museums and libraries are increasingly digitizing and publishing images of their collection online, even granting licenses for free commercial reuse. Institutes such as the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam or the Statens Museum for Kunst in Copenhagen give up, renounce to their revenue from reused images to invest in marketing and to build new relationships with entrepreneurs and creative industries. According to this new vision, the role of the cultural institutes is to stimulate the cultural and economic growth of the whole society. Museums, in this way, are not only the ideal place for the solitary and silent study of the academic researchers, are for all. The director of SMK says, it's your cultural heritage, use it. At this, currently, the only major museum in Italy adopting free licenses is the Egyptian Museum in Turin. While for other institutions, the distinction between personal or cultural use and commercial usage is still pretty strict. In conclusion, by choosing open licenses, many institutes have shown a new approach to digital photos, remarking an evolution from the culture of the access to the one of the reuse of the cultural data. This transition, which was unthinkable only a few years ago, has now become a subject of discussion we can no longer ignore. Merci beaucoup.
Grazie mille. Est-ce qu'il y a une question en français ou in English? Yeah. Is there a short question? Otherwise, yeah.
If I remember correctly, this year there has been some kind of a lot of discussions on some kind of noise when the culturali gave the rights of reproduction to Richmond agency, or maybe there was an agency that acquired the reproduction rights for the collection of Italian museums. How does it fit in? Because we have seen very enthusiastic ideas, but how does this fit in with what was seen as a huge leap backwards?
Yes. This episode is known, and Bridgman has written a contract with the Ministry of Culture in Italy. But it's important to stress that the content of this agreement is not a form of exclusive use from Bridgman society. So it's in Italy, as I said before, there is a pretty strict distinction between the two types of usage. And so this is the part of a cultural path, of a shape. And during the last years, the Ministry of Culture began a dialogue with with other ideas about and concepts about the free use of images. So the debate is going on, and but I would to stress that these reforms thanks to this reform, all the prohibitions of photography in museums and also in archives and libraries disappear. So this is the first step, and we hope that dialogue can go on during the next time.